They called him the Lotto Loot. In 2002, he won £9.7 million at just 19 years old. But instead of security, his fortune brought chaos. Parties, cars, substances, and headlines. Within years, the money was gone, his mansion wrecked, and his name dragged through the tabloids. The news shocked the country. A teenager, who had been earning minimum wage, suddenly became one of the youngest lottery millionaires in Britain.
I felt lightheaded and shocked. Well, first thing I bought was a leather jacket, which is 140 quid. I spent 325,000 on my mansion in Swaffham, an extra 40,000 to buy the field beside it, £200,000 doing a house up, putting a swimming pool indoor on it, and then I bought another bungalow for 325,000.
He stood smiling for the cameras. He wore a tracksuit and a baseball cap. In his hand, he held the giant check. Reporters crowded around him. Photographs were splashed across every newspaper. For many, it looked like a fairy tale. But within hours, stories began to spread. Michael Carroll was not like other winners. He did not speak about investing money. He did not mention planning for the future. Instead, his words were different. He said he wanted cars, parties, and fun. He told journalists he wanted to enjoy himself. Some laughed, some worried. The shock only grew as the weeks passed. Neighbors began to talk. They said his home became a gathering place. Expensive cars were parked outside. Crowds of people came and went. There were loud parties. There was constant attention. Local police were called to disturbances. Some in the town felt proud of him. Others said the win had brought chaos. Michael's appearance in the media added to the drama. He bought gold jewelry. He drove flashy cars. He smiled with women at his side. He was pictured at races, at clubs, and at parties. Every step was photographed. Every headline grew larger. To many, he became the Lotto Loot. The nickname stuck. It was not only the press who watched. Criminal groups also noticed him. His sudden wealth made him a target. Stories circulated that gang members demanded money from him. He claimed he was threatened. He said he had to hand over cash to dangerous men. Some believed him. Some thought it was just another story. Michael also began to talk about how he used his money. He admitted he spent large amounts on goodies. He said white powder took a huge part of his fortune. He also spoke openly about adult workers. These claims shocked the public. People who once saw him as a lucky teenager now saw him as reckless. The fairy tale image was gone. By 2004, reports showed that millions of pounds had already vanished. His lifestyle was expensive. Cars were bought and written off. Properties were damaged. Parties lasted for days. Friends came and left. Trust was broken. His mansion in Swaffham became infamous. The press called it a party palace. Photographs showed the garden littered with rubbish. Windows were smashed. Neighbors complained it was a nightmare to live nearby. The contrast was striking. He had once been a bin man. He now owned a mansion, but the mansion looked abandoned and wrecked. It became a symbol of waste. The public began to turn against him. Where once they saw excitement, now they saw failure. The situation became even more serious when police got involved. Michael was arrested on several occasions. He faced charges of illegal substance use and disorderly behavior. He spent time in court. He even wore an electronic tag. The boy who had once smiled with a giant check was now photographed walking into magistrates' courts. The wider public reaction was harsh. Letters appeared in newspapers. People said his story was a warning. They said the money had been wasted. They said it should have gone to someone who would use it better. Michael's name became linked with chaos. By 2006, the reality was clear. He had burned through millions. Reports said he had very little left. His mansion was falling apart. His reputation was in ruins. The young man who had once been celebrated was now pitied or mocked. The story that began with cheers had turned into headlines filled with ridicule. But for Michael, the cycle did not end. Even as money slipped away, he continued to live the same way. He admitted he could not stop. He said the habits were too strong. The parties and the chaos carried on. Each new article only made the downfall more public. What had started as one of Britain's most shocking lottery wins was now something else. It was no longer a story of luck. It had become a story of destruction. For his community, it was a reminder of how fast life can change, how his life has changed. Michael Carroll was born in Swaffham, Norfolk, in 1983. His childhood was unstable. His father, a Royal Air Force sergeant. He was jailed for a fierce outbreak on a couple and later passed away from a heart stroke while in prison. His mother struggled to raise him and his siblings alone. Carroll was only a child when his father was locked away, leaving him without guidance. His early years shaped much of what came later. At school, Carroll was placed in a special needs program. He had difficulty with reading and writing. Teachers noticed his disruptive behavior and lack of concentration. He was often absent and eventually left with no formal qualifications. His teenage years were marked by wrongdoings. He was arrested several times for shoplifting and disorderly conduct. He later admitted he spent much of his youth hanging around with the wrong crowd. Carroll found work briefly as a refuse collector. The job was basic and the wages were low. He worked shifts collecting rubbish around Norfolk. At the time, he had little ambition and no clear direction in life. In 2002, at the age of 19, everything changed. He bought a lottery ticket at his local shop. The jackpot was £9.7 million. His win was one of the biggest ever in Britain at the time. Overnight, Carroll went from a bin man to a multi-millionaire. The win brought national attention. Carroll appeared in newspapers across the country. He wore a tracksuit and gold jewelry in many of his first photos. The media quickly gave him the nickname Lotto Lout. His background, behavior, and spending habits made him a controversial figure. For many, he was the image of wasted wealth. Carroll's first moves after winning were bold. He bought a luxury home in Downham Market, Norfolk. It had several bedrooms, a large garden, and space for parties. He also purchased expensive cars, including a BMW and a Mercedes. His house soon became known for constant noise, drinking, and fights. Neighbors complained about the late-night activity and damage caused by his visitors. He gave away a large amount of money in the early days. Carroll handed out nearly £3.9 million to family and friends. He believed his win should benefit those close to him, but many who took money later distanced themselves or fell out with him. The generosity did not bring him the loyalty he expected. Carroll also invested in high-risk business ideas. He spent time on a racing team, hoping to find success in motorsports. The team collapsed within months, losing hundreds of thousands of pounds. Other ventures, including property deals, also failed. He lacked financial planning and admitted he had little knowledge of business. Accountants and advisors warned him, but he often ignored their advice. His lifestyle quickly changed. Carroll hosted wild parties at his mansion. Strangers and new acquaintances flooded into his life. Illegal substances and reckless spending became regular. Cars were crashed and written off. The garden of his property became a racetrack for quad bikes and banger racing. Police were called to his home many times. Local residents described it as chaos. Carroll's marriage also suffered. He married his childhood sweetheart, Sandra Aitken, shortly after the win. The couple had a daughter together, but the marriage broke down within a year. Sandra accused him of cheating and heavy medication use. She left him and later said the lottery ruined their lives. Carroll admitted that the money changed everything and destroyed his family relationships. By 2005, Carroll's reputation was cemented. He was no longer seen as just a lucky winner. He was portrayed as an example of wasted fortune. The press followed his every move. Carroll admitted later that the pressure of fame was overwhelming. He said he could not escape being recognized in public. Crowds would mock him or ask for money. He described living in a goldfish bowl. Instead of handling the fame quietly, he reacted with defiance. He enjoyed being the center of attention but did little to change public opinion. The turning point came when he began selling off assets. Cars and property were auctioned to pay debts. His mansion was eventually sold. The once grand home had been damaged and left in poor condition. Friends who once surrounded him drifted away. Carroll was left with fewer allies and less money. Despite the loss, Carroll showed little regret. He often claimed he had lived a life others could only dream of. He admitted to making mistakes but argued he would do much of it the same way again. He said the lottery gave him freedom, even if it was temporary. But how did all of it start? From where and why? And if you find stories like this important, consider subscribing. By the mid-2000s, the fortune that once brought him into the public spotlight was noticeably shrinking. His lifestyle and decisions took a toll, and the money he had won in 2002 was not stretching as far as it once had. What had started as excitement and celebration began to show its consequences. The lottery win had given him the ability to live without limits, but it also opened the door to reckless spending. he admitted that millions went quickly. By 2006, reports confirmed that large amounts of his winnings had been spent or lost. His fame continued to attract media attention, but now the stories focused less on celebration and more on waste and decline. Carroll's image in the press shifted. Early coverage showed him as a young man enjoying his good fortune. Later coverage highlighted financial mismanagement. He acknowledged himself that he did not manage his money carefully. He gave money away to people around him. It was a lifestyle without thought for the long term. Public perception changed along with the reports. Some people viewed him as careless. Others saw him as someone taken advantage of. He was open in interviews about mistakes and how quickly money could disappear. His honesty was striking. He admitted that the win had not brought the happiness many imagined. Instead, it left him struggling to handle the pressures that came with it. By 2010, Carroll was no longer a millionaire. Media outlets covered the story widely. His fall from wealth became almost as famous as his win. It showed a sharp contrast between sudden fortune and financial ruin. His name became connected with the idea of how money can be lost when not managed. He was only in his late 20s when most of his money was gone. During this time, Carroll faced more than financial issues. His personal relationships also went through strain. Friends and family were often mentioned in reports as being part of his spending and social life. He gave away large sums, but the connections did not last. He was left with less support as the money ran out. The homes he had purchased were eventually sold. He no longer lived the lifestyle that once filled headlines. He spoke about the challenges of going from wealth to normal life. His story was not only about money, but also about the isolation that can come with sudden fame. Carroll himself said that money had not solved his problems. Instead, it created new ones. The National Lottery and Camelot, the company that ran it, often refused to comment directly on his case. But his example was used in wider discussions about financial advice for winners. Carroll admitted he had ignored opportunities to plan properly. Advisors had been available, but he chose to follow his own path. The result left him with little to show for nearly £7 million. By the early 2010s, Carroll's story became more about survival than success. Reports showed he was working regular jobs. He tried to move away from the attention that followed him since 2002. But the press continued to cover his life, often highlighting the dramatic change from being a millionaire to working-class employment again. Carroll spoke in later interviews about regret. He explained that winning so young made him careless. He admitted that at 19 he had no idea how to manage that amount of money. The sudden responsibility was overwhelming. He believed that if he had won later in life, the outcome might have been different. His honesty made him a unique figure compared to other winners. The contrast between the start of his journey and where it led was sharp. He once appeared in photos holding giant checks, smiling, and surrounded by new possessions. Less than a decade later, he was speaking about mistakes, financial losses, and the challenges of normal life. His story was presented as a cautionary tale in many newspapers. Carroll's case stood out because it showed both extremes. He experienced wealth, fame, and recognition. Then he faced the realities of losing it all. Unlike many other winners who stayed out of the spotlight, he remained visible. That visibility kept his story alive. It became an example repeatedly discussed whenever lottery wins were reported. In time, Carroll stepped back from interviews. But his story had already left an impact. His journey from riches to struggle was often retold by the media. It created debates about financial education, sudden wealth, and the role of responsibility. Carroll admitted himself that the money had gone faster than he could imagine. He recognized that his own choices had led to it. By this stage of his life, he no longer lived as the lottery lout, the nickname given to him by tabloids. Instead, he was a man trying to rebuild. His experience showed that fortune did not guarantee security. It showed that wealth could vanish, and that winning the lottery was not always a permanent solution. Michael Carroll's story was now less about extravagance and more about lessons learned. His openness about mistakes made him a rare case among winners. He did not hide what happened. He spoke about it directly, often with blunt honesty. That made his journey stand out even more in the eyes of the public. But what happened to him after all? In 2010, Michael Carroll faced another turn in his life. The man once known as the Lotto Lout was sent to jail again. This time it was for substance-related offenses. He was given a 3.5-year sentence. The court heard details of his involvement in handling substances and failing to comply with conditions. It marked another fall for a man who had once been at the top of public attention. In prison, Carroll spoke about how his fortune had been wasted. He admitted he had no money left. The millions from his jackpot were gone. What had once seemed like a never-ending supply of wealth had disappeared. He told reporters that by the time of his sentence, he was living off very little. The mansion was long gone. The cars had been sold. The parties were a memory. After serving his sentence, Carroll tried to keep out of the public eye. He left the UK and worked abroad. Reports confirmed he went to work in jobs such as coal shoveling and biscuit factories. These roles were far removed from the image of fast cars and lottery wealth. He earned basic wages, the same as many ordinary workers. He seemed to accept that his life had taken a very different direction. The contrast between his past and present was striking. At one point, Carroll had spoken of wanting to own racehorses and live like the rich. Now he lived a modest lifestyle. Journalists tracked him down in Scotland and even Russia, where he worked away from the press. His name was still known to the British public, but he was no longer living in the spotlight. His family life had also suffered. Relationships had broken down. The pressures of fame, money, and law-breaking had affected those closest to him. Friends from his early days were no longer by his side. Many who had been around during the height of his fortune had disappeared once the money was gone. Carroll admitted he was often alone, working to rebuild himself away from the chaos of his past. In interviews, he said he did not regret winning. He claimed he had lived life to the fullest, even if the money was wasted. But others pointed to the sadness of the story. A young man who could have secured his future had instead gone through jail sentences, addiction issues, and financial ruin. His case was raised often in discussions about how sudden wealth can affect people. By the mid-2010s, Carroll's name still appeared in newspapers. Headlines spoke of his latest work or attempts to stay out of trouble. He admitted he had nothing left from the £9.7 million win. His total assets had fallen to nothing. His life was compared to those who had carefully invested their winnings and lived comfortably. Carroll's path had gone the other way. In later years, Carroll spoke about lessons learned. He said money had come too quickly and that he was not prepared for it. He also blamed himself for poor choices and the lifestyle he had chosen. He expressed that he had no plans of chasing fame or fortune again. Instead, he wanted to continue earning honestly through normal jobs. His story became a reference point in British culture. People often used his name when talking about the risks of sudden success. The media labeled him as a warning to future lottery winners. His life had shown how money without guidance could quickly be lost. Despite the negative coverage, some admired him for surviving and still working after losing everything. By the 2020s, Carroll had settled into relative quiet. He was said to be working abroad, still earning modest wages. He no longer made the front pages regularly. The chaos of his 20s had been replaced with a simpler existence. He spoke less to the press, choosing instead to keep his life private. The public still remembered him. To many, he would always be the lotto loot. But for Carroll, the label was no longer his focus. He wanted to move on. He had faced the highs of sudden fortune, the lows of jail and loss, and the reality of starting again with nothing. The story of Michael Carroll closed with a clear message. His journey remained one of the most famous examples of a lottery winner who lost it all. Carroll's life after the lottery serves as a lasting reminder. Wealth without stability can disappear. Fame without privacy can destroy. His case continues to be studied, not only for its drama, but also for its lessons about money and human choices.